In 1965, the Soviet space program reached heights that Western intelligence could only imagine. Yet beneath the triumphant headlines of Pravda and the carefully orchestrated parades in Red Square, a silence had settled over certain sectors of the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. It was a silence that would echo through classified archives for decades, concerning a mission that officially never existed and a cosmonaut whose name was systematically erased from every record. The man who would come to be known only as Cosmonaut Zero had been born Ivan Alexandrovich Volkov in 1937 in the industrial city of Tula, approximately 193 kilometers south of Moscow. His father, Alexander Petrovich Volkov, worked in the munitions factories that would later supply the Red Army during the Great Patriotic War. His mother, Yelena Mikhailovna Volkova, taught mathematics at the local secondary school. They were, by all accounts, an unremarkable family living in unremarkable circumstances during unremarkable times. Ivan's childhood unfolded against the backdrop of Stalin's Soviet Union, where children learned to recite the achievements of the state before they could properly tie their shoes. The Volkov family lived in a communal apartment on Komsomolskaya Street, sharing kitchen facilities with 3 other families. The building, constructed in the early 1900s, retained the architectural sensibilities of Tsarist Russia, though its grandeur had long since faded into the practical grey of socialist reality. From an early age, Ivan displayed an unusual fascination with the sky. His mother would later recall how he would stand at their 3rd-floor window for hours, tracking the movement of clouds and aircraft with the methodical precision that would later serve him well in his aeronautical studies. His academic performance was exceptional, particularly in mathematics and physics, subjects that seemed to come naturally to him despite the limited resources available in Tula's educational system. The Great Patriotic War arrived when Ivan was 4 years old, bringing with it the shortages, fear, and propaganda that would shape an entire generation. His father was conscripted into the Red Army in 1941 and was reported missing in action near Stalingrad in 1943. The official notification, delivered by a young lieutenant with trembling hands, stated simply that Alexander Petrovich Volkov had died serving the motherland. No remains were ever recovered. This loss fundamentally altered the trajectory of the Volkov household. Yelena Mikhailovna struggled to maintain their standard of living on a teacher's salary while caring for Ivan and his younger sister Katya, who had been born just months before their father's deployment. The family was forced to move to a smaller room in the same building, surrendering their modest privacy to economic necessity. Ivan's response to his father's death was to withdraw into his studies with even greater intensity. His teachers noted that he displayed an almost unsettling focus, completing assignments with mechanical precision while rarely engaging in the social activities that occupied his classmates. He spoke little about his father's fate, but neighbors observed that he had begun spending even more time at the window, now tracking not just clouds and aircraft, but also the movement of stars across the night sky. The war ended when Ivan was 8 years old, and the Soviet Union began its transformation into a global superpower. The space race was still years away, but the foundations were being laid in research facilities and design bureaus across the country. Ivan's academic excellence continued throughout his secondary education, and in 1955, at the age of 18, he was accepted into the Moscow Aviation Institute, one of the most prestigious technical universities in the Soviet Union. His departure from Tula was subdued. His mother accompanied him to the train station, carrying a small leather suitcase that contained all his worldly possessions. Yelena Mikhailovna had aged considerably during the war years, her dark hair now streaked with premature grey. her face bearing the lines that marked the women of her generation. She embraced her son on the platform with the restrained emotion typical of Soviet families, whispering something in his ear that witnesses could not hear. Ivan boarded the train without looking back, settling into his seat with the same mechanical precision that characterized all his movements. Moscow in the mid-1950s was a city rebuilding itself in the image of communist ambition. The devastation of the war had been largely erased, replaced by massive construction projects that proclaimed the inevitability of socialist progress. Ivan took lodgings in a dormitory near the Aviation Institute, sharing a room with 3 other students from various corners of the Soviet Union. His roommates would later describe Ivan as polite but distant, a young man who fulfilled his social obligations without ever truly engaging with those around him. He attended lectures, completed assignments, and participated in the mandatory political education sessions with the same methodical approach he brought to everything else. His professors noted his exceptional grasp of aerodynamics and orbital mechanics, subjects that were becoming increasingly relevant as the Soviet space program accelerated under the direction of chief designer Sergei Korolev. In 1957, while Ivan was completing his 3rd year of studies, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, fundamentally altering humanity's relationship with space and establishing the USSR as the leader in what would become known as the space race. The achievement sent ripples of excitement through the Aviation Institute, where students and faculty alike understood that they were witnessing the dawn of a new era. Ivan's response to Sputnik was characteristically measured, but his academic advisor, Professor Dmitry Sergeyevich Petrov, noticed a subtle shift in the young man's focus. Where previously Ivan had shown interest in conventional aircraft design, he now devoted his attention exclusively to spacecraft and the challenges of human spaceflight. His thesis project, completed in 1959, examined the psychological and physiological stresses of extended orbital flight, displaying an understanding of the subject that impressed even seasoned researchers. Upon graduation, Ivan was recruited directly into the Soviet space program, a selection process shrouded in the same secrecy that characterized all aspects of the program. His superiors recognized his exceptional technical skills and his psychological profile, which suggested an individual capable of functioning effectively under extreme stress while maintaining the discipline necessary for sensitive missions. The training facility where Ivan reported in the autumn of 1959 was located outside Zhukovsky, approximately 40 kilometers southeast of Moscow. The compound consisted of several nondescript buildings surrounded by high fences and patrolled by uniformed guards. New recruits were housed in Spartan barracks and subjected to a regimen that tested every aspect of their physical and mental capabilities. Ivan excelled in all phases of training, demonstrating the same methodical approach that had characterized his academic career. His instructors noted his exceptional performance in isolation exercises, where candidates were confined to small chambers for extended periods to simulate the psychological stresses of spaceflight. Where other trainees showed signs of anxiety or disorientation, Ivan appeared to adapt to solitude as if it were his natural state. The selection process for actual flight assignments was never fully explained to the candidates. Some trainees simply disappeared from the program, reassigned to other duties without explanation. Others were informed that they would serve as backup crews for missions that might materialize at some future date. A select few were chosen for immediate flight preparation, entering an even more secretive phase of training that isolated them from their colleagues and, in many cases, from their families. Ivan received notification of his selection for active flight status in the spring of 1962, approximately 6 months after Yuri Gagarin's historic first manned spaceflight. The notification came in the form of a brief conversation with a senior officer whose name was never revealed and whose face Ivan would struggle to remember in subsequent years. He was informed that he would be transferred to a specialized training facility and that all contact with his previous life, including his family in Tula, would be suspended for an indefinite period. The specialized facility was located at Baikonur, though Ivan was never officially informed of its location. Transportation was provided in a windowless truck that traveled for what seemed like days across increasingly desolate terrain. When the vehicle finally stopped and Ivan was allowed to disembark, he found himself in a landscape unlike anything he had previously experienced. Baikonur in 1962 was a city carved from the Kazakh steppe, a monument to Soviet technological ambition rising from one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. The cosmodrome itself sprawled across hundreds of square kilometers, its launch pads and assembly buildings connected by roads that stretched to the horizon. The air carried the constant scent of rocket fuel and the metallic taste of industrial chemicals. Ivan's quarters at Baikonur were more comfortable than his previous accommodations, but equally isolated. He was assigned to a small apartment in a building reserved for flight crews, with access to specialized facilities for physical conditioning and technical training. Contact with other personnel was strictly limited and always supervised. Meals were taken alone or with a small group of other cosmonauts whose identities were known to Ivan only by their call signs. The training regimen at Baikonur was unlike anything Ivan had previously experienced. Days began before dawn with physical conditioning exercises designed to prepare the body for the stresses of launch and orbital flight. Technical sessions occupied the remainder of the day, covering spacecraft systems, emergency procedures, and mission protocols with exhausting detail. Evenings were devoted to psychological conditioning, including extended isolation exercises and stress tests that pushed trainees to their mental and emotional limits. Ivan adapted to this routine with the same methodical precision that had characterized his entire life. His instructors noted that he appeared to thrive in the isolated environment, displaying none of the homesickness or anxiety that affected other trainees. His technical knowledge was exceptional, and his performance in simulated emergency scenarios consistently exceeded expectations. As 1963 progressed, Ivan's training became increasingly specialized and secretive. He was introduced to spacecraft systems that differed significantly from those used in publicized missions, featuring experimental technologies and configurations that suggested purposes beyond routine orbital flights. The mission profiles he studied involved extended periods in space, complex orbital maneuvers, and procedures that seemed designed for encounters with objects or situations that were never fully explained. The other cosmonauts in Ivan's training group gradually disappeared, reassigned to other programs, or simply vanishing from the facility without explanation. By the winter of 1963, Ivan was the only remaining member of what had originally been a class of 12 candidates. His isolation became complete, with even his instructors rotating regularly to maintain operational security. It was during this period that Ivan began to understand the true nature of his assignment. Conversations with technical personnel, though always carefully controlled, revealed that he was being prepared for a mission that existed outside the normal structure of the Soviet space program. References were made to special objectives and strategic requirements that suggested his flight would serve purposes beyond scientific research or propaganda value. The spacecraft designated for Ivan's mission was unlike any vehicle previously used by the Soviet space program. Designated only as Object 77 Alpha in the technical documentation, it featured an extended life support system, enhanced radiation shielding, and communication equipment that operated on frequencies reserved for military applications. The craft was designed for missions lasting several months, with the capability for complex orbital maneuvers and rendezvous operations. Ivan's final phase of training began in the spring of 1964. He was introduced to the actual spacecraft he would pilot, spending hundreds of hours in simulations that familiarized him with every system and procedure. The craft's interior was cramped even by the standards of early space vehicles, with barely enough room for the pilot to move between the control station and the small living area that would serve as home during the extended mission. The mission profile was revealed to Ivan only days before his scheduled launch. He would be inserted into a highly elliptical orbit that would take him far from Earth, following a trajectory that would bring him into proximity with what were described only as objects of strategic interest. His role was to observe, document, and report on these objects using specialized sensing equipment installed aboard the spacecraft. The launch was scheduled for October 19, 1965, during a period when Soviet space activities would be focused on other missions that would serve as cover for Ivan's departure. No announcements would be made regarding his flight, and no records would be kept in the official archives of the space program. For all purposes, except those known to a small group of senior officials, Ivan's mission would never have occurred. The morning of October 19th dawned clear and cold across the Kazakh steppe. Ivan reported to the assembly building before sunrise, where technicians assisted him into his pressure suit and conducted the final systems checks. The spacecraft had been mounted atop a modified R-7 rocket, its configuration different enough from standard launches that it was unrecognizable to most personnel at the Cosmodrome. Ivan's final communications with ground control before launch were limited to technical confirmations and status reports. He was alone in the spacecraft, separated from the outside world by layers of metal and ceramic that would protect him during his journey, but also serve as his prison if anything went wrong. The countdown proceeded with mechanical precision, each milestone marked by brief radio exchanges that revealed nothing of the anxiety that surely accompanied such a historic moment. At precisely 11:47 local time, the rocket engines ignited with a roar that could be heard across the entire Cosmodrome. Ivan felt the familiar sensation of acceleration as the launcher lifted away from the pad, carrying him toward an orbit that would take him farther from Earth than any human had previously traveled. The launch phase proceeded normally, with each stage separation occurring exactly as planned. Orbital insertion was confirmed at 11:59, placing Ivan in the highly elliptical trajectory that would define his mission. Initial systems checks revealed that all spacecraft functions were operating within normal parameters. Ground control established communication protocols that would govern contact during the mission, though these would be limited to brief exchanges during specific orbital windows. Ivan's first few days in space followed the routine that had been established during his training. He conducted systems checks, monitored spacecraft performance, and prepared his equipment for the primary mission objectives that would begin when his orbit carried him to the designated encounter points. The Earth passed below him in the familiar cycle that all space travelers experience, though his altitude was such that the planet appeared significantly smaller than it had to previous cosmonauts. Communication with ground control during this initial phase was professional and routine. Ivan reported his status and spacecraft condition during scheduled contact windows, receiving instructions for upcoming activities and confirmations that his mission was proceeding as planned. Nothing in these exchanges suggested that anything was amiss or that the mission objectives had changed. The first indication that something was wrong came on October 23rd, during what should have been a routine communication pass. Ground control's responses to Ivan's status reports were delayed and seemed to lack the precision that had characterized previous exchanges. When Ivan requested clarification of his instructions for the next phase of the mission, He received only a brief acknowledgement and a directive to maintain his current course. Over the following days, communication with ground control became increasingly sporadic and strange. Responses to Ivan's reports were often delayed by hours, and when they came, they frequently seemed unrelated to the information he had provided. Requests for status updates came at odd intervals, sometimes interrupting planned activities or overlapping with other scheduled communications. Ivan initially attributed these anomalies to equipment problems or changes in personnel at ground control. His training had prepared him to operate independently when necessary, and he continued to follow his mission profile while attempting to maintain regular contact with Earth. His spacecraft systems continued to function normally, and he had not yet reached the orbital positions where his primary objectives were scheduled to begin. The first significant deviation from his planned mission occurred on October 27th, when Ivan received instructions to alter his spacecraft's orbit using the onboard propulsion system. The maneuver would place him in a different trajectory than originally planned, one that would extend his mission duration and take him to regions of space not covered in his briefings. When Ivan requested confirmation and explanation of the new instructions, he received only a terse acknowledgement and a repetition of the original command. Ivan executed the orbital maneuver as instructed, though he noted the change in his mission log, along with his concerns about the lack of explanation. The new trajectory would indeed extend his mission significantly, potentially beyond the capabilities of his life support systems, depending on how long he remained in the altered orbit. His training had emphasized the importance of following instructions from ground control, but he was also responsible for the safety of his spacecraft and mission. Communication attempts over the next several days yielded increasingly bizarre results. Ground control's responses often seemed to come from different operators who were unfamiliar with Ivan's mission status or previous instructions. Some communications were cut off abruptly, as if the transmission had been interrupted. Others contained information that contradicted earlier directives or referred to aspects of the mission that had never been part of Ivan's briefing. It was during this period that Ivan began to suspect that something had gone seriously wrong, either with the communication systems or with the ground control facility itself. His attempts to establish clear communication protocols were unsuccessful, and his requests for mission updates or emergency procedures were either ignored or answered with responses that made little sense in the context of his situation. The spacecraft's automated systems continued to function normally, maintaining life support, power, and navigation without requiring significant intervention from Ivan. However, consumable supplies were being depleted according to the original mission timeline, and the orbital changes he had been instructed to make meant that he would soon face critical shortages if the mission continued as currently planned. Ivan's training had included procedures for emergency return to Earth, though these were considered last resort options that would only be employed in the most dire circumstances. The procedures required specific authorizations from ground control and coordination with recovery forces that would need to be positioned in advance. Without clear communication with Earth, implementing an emergency return would be extremely dangerous and potentially impossible. As October turned to November, Ivan found himself in an increasingly precarious situation. His orbit had carried him far from Earth according to the revised trajectory, and his life support systems were operating at the limits of their design parameters. Communication with ground control had become completely unreliable, with periods of silence lasting for days, punctuated by brief transmissions that often seemed to come from different sources. The realization that he had been abandoned came gradually, as Ivan exhausted every possible explanation for the communication failures and mission changes. His requests for clarification or emergency assistance went unanswered, and his automated distress signals, if they were being received at all, generated no response from ground control or recovery forces. Ivan's mission logs from this period, recovered decades later from classified archives, reveal a man slowly coming to terms with the possibility that he would never return to Earth. His technical training allowed him to calculate precisely how long his remaining consumables would last, and the mathematics were unforgiving. Even if communication with ground control was restored immediately, the orbital mechanics involved in mounting a rescue mission would require weeks or months to implement. The spacecraft's orbit continued to carry Ivan farther from Earth with each passing day. His altitude reached points where the planet appeared as little more than a bright star against the black of space, and the communication delays made real-time contact impossible even if ground control had been responsive. He was alone in the most complete sense possible, separated from every other living thing by distances that no rescue mission could bridge in time to save him. Ivan's response to this realization was consistent with the psychological profile that had led to his selection for the mission. Rather than descending into panic or despair, he focused on documenting his situation and maintaining his spacecraft for as long as possible. His mission logs became increasingly detailed, recording not only technical data, but also his observations of space and his thoughts about the mission that had brought him to his current circumstances. It was during this period that Ivan made the discoveries that would later give his mission significance beyond its original objectives. His spacecraft's sensors detected objects in space that matched no known natural phenomena or human-made devices. These objects appeared to be artificial in nature, displaying characteristics that suggested advanced technology beyond anything in the Soviet or American space programs. Ivan's documentation of these objects was meticulous, including detailed sensor readings, photographic evidence, and speculative analyses based on his technical training. The objects appeared to be observing his spacecraft, maintaining consistent distances and orientations that suggested they were under intelligent control. Their behavior implied an awareness of Ivan's presence and possibly an interest in his mission. The implications of these discoveries were staggering. But Ivan had no way to communicate his findings to Earth. His attempts to alter his spacecraft's trajectory to approach the objects more closely were unsuccessful, limited by his remaining fuel and the constraints of orbital mechanics. He could only observe and document, creating a record that he hoped would somehow reach human hands, even if he did not survive to deliver it personally. As November progressed, Ivan's situation became increasingly desperate. His life support consumables were approaching critical levels, and his calculations indicated that he had at most a few weeks before the spacecraft's environment became uninhabitable. The mysterious objects continued to observe his craft, but they made no apparent attempt to assist him or interfere with his activities. Ivan's final mission logs reveal a man at peace with his fate, focused on completing his documentation rather than dwelling on his approaching death. He spent his remaining time organizing his records and ensuring that they would be preserved in the spacecraft's data storage systems, where they might be recovered by future missions, even if his own body was never found. The last confirmed communication from Ivan's spacecraft was received on November 14, 1965, though this was not discovered until much later due to the communication protocols that had been established for his mission. The transmission contained only routine telemetry data, with no indication that Ivan was still alive or capable of operating his radio equipment. Official Soviet records contain no mention of Ivan's mission or his fate. The spacecraft, designated as Object 77 Alpha, was never acknowledged to exist, and Ivan Alexandrovich Volkov disappeared from all official documentation as if he had never been born. His mother in Tula received notification that her son had died in an aircraft accident, with burial arrangements handled by military authorities who provided no details about the circumstances of his death. The truth about Ivan's mission remained classified at the highest levels of the Soviet government, known only to a small group of officials who were directly involved in authorizing the flight. As the years passed and the political landscape changed, even this limited circle of knowledge was reduced through natural attrition and the deliberate destruction of sensitive records. It was not until the collapse of the Soviet Union that fragments of information about Ivan's mission began to surface in declassified archives and the testimonies of former officials. Even then, the full story remained incomplete, with crucial documents missing or destroyed and key witnesses deceased or unwilling to speak publicly about their involvement. The spacecraft containing Ivan's remains and his documented discoveries has never been recovered. Orbital calculations suggest that it remains in the highly elliptical trajectory to which Ivan was redirected, though its precise location and condition are unknown. The objects he observed and documented have never been officially acknowledged or investigated, leaving his findings as one of the most significant untold stories in the history of human space exploration. In the decades since Ivan's disappearance, occasional radar contacts and unexplained orbital objects have been reported by both military and civilian space tracking systems. These reports typically describe objects in highly elliptical orbits similar to Ivan's projected trajectory, leading some researchers to speculate that his spacecraft may still be intact and detectable under certain conditions. Former Soviet space program personnel who have spoken about Ivan's mission describe it as the most classified operation in the program's history, surpassing even the military applications of space technology in its secrecy level. The few individuals willing to discuss the mission at all speak only in generalities, referring to special objectives and strategic discoveries, without providing specific details. The mysterious objects that Ivan documented during his final weeks remain unexplained by conventional science or known technology. His detailed sensor readings and photographic evidence, preserved in archived mission logs, describe phenomena that challenge our understanding of space and the possibility of extraterrestrial technology. However, without corroboration or additional evidence, these findings remain relegated to classified files and speculation. Ivan's mother, Yelena Mikhailovna, lived until 1987, never learning the true fate of her son. She maintained a small shrine in her Tula apartment, consisting of his childhood photographs and the few personal items he had left behind when he departed for Moscow. Neighbors recall that she would often stand at the same window where Ivan had watched the sky as a child, looking upward with an expression of waiting that never left her face. The building where the Volkov family lived on Komsomolskaya Street was demolished in the 1990s as part of urban renewal projects. The site now houses a modern shopping complex, with no indication that it was once home to a family whose son became one of history's most forgotten cosmonauts. The only remaining physical evidence of Ivan's childhood is a class photograph from his secondary school, preserved in the local historical society's archives. Ivan's sister, Katya, immigrated to Germany after the fall of the Soviet Union, taking with her the few family documents that had survived the decades. She has never spoken publicly about her brother, though friends report that she occasionally receives visitors who ask detailed questions about Ivan's childhood and family background. These visitors identify themselves as researchers or historians, but their affiliations and the specific nature of their interest remain unclear. The legacy of Ivan's mission extends beyond the tragedy of his fate to the broader questions it raises about humanity's place in the universe and the responsibilities that come with space exploration. His documentation suggests that our ventures beyond Earth may have consequences and encounters that our current understanding cannot accommodate or explain. Recent developments in space technology and the emergence of private space exploration have renewed interest in missions like Ivan's, where the objectives extend beyond scientific research or commercial applications. However, the lessons of his experience suggest that such endeavors require careful consideration of the risks involved and the support systems necessary to ensure the safety of those who venture into the unknown. The international space community has quietly acknowledged the importance of Ivan's mission through the establishment of protocols designed to prevent similar tragedies. These include improved communication systems, enhanced life support capabilities, and international agreements regarding the rescue of astronauts in distress, regardless of their nationality or the political circumstances surrounding their missions. Some researchers have suggested that Ivan's discoveries, if verified, would represent the most significant scientific breakthrough in human history. The implications of confirmed contact with extraterrestrial technology would fundamentally alter our understanding of life in the universe and our own technological development. However, the classified nature of his findings has prevented the scientific community from conducting the rigorous analysis necessary to validate his observations. The question of whether Ivan's spacecraft might still be recoverable has been the subject of ongoing speculation among space enthusiasts and researchers. Advances in space technology and orbital tracking capabilities have made it theoretically possible to locate and potentially retrieve objects in the type of orbit where his craft was last known to be traveling. Private space companies have occasionally expressed interest in mounting recovery missions for historical space artifacts, though none have publicly acknowledged plans to search for Ivan's spacecraft specifically. The technical challenges involved would be enormous, requiring advanced propulsion systems and life support capabilities that are only now becoming available through commercial space development. The political implications of recovering Ivan's spacecraft and its documented evidence would be significant, potentially affecting international relations and our understanding of space exploration history. The objects he observed and documented represent questions that have never been answered and discoveries that have never been officially acknowledged by any government or space agency. Ivan's story serves as a reminder of the human cost of exploration and the individuals who have sacrificed their lives to expand our understanding of the universe. His methodical approach to documenting his situation, even in the face of certain death, exemplifies the dedication that drives scientific discovery and the pursuit of knowledge regardless of personal consequences. The silence that has surrounded Ivan's mission for nearly 60 years reflects the complex relationship between scientific discovery and political necessity that has characterized much of human space exploration. His experience demonstrates how individual achievements can be lost when they conflict with broader strategic objectives, or when they reveal information that authorities are not prepared to acknowledge. As we continue to venture deeper into space and encounter phenomena that challenge our current understanding, Ivan's legacy reminds us of the importance of preserving knowledge and maintaining contact with those who venture into the unknown. His documentation may eventually prove to be one of the most valuable records in the history of space exploration, regardless of the circumstances that led to its creation. The mystery of what happened to Ivan Alexandrovich Volkov continues to resonate in the halls of space agencies and the imaginations of those who study the history of human spaceflight. His transformation from a methodical student to a forgotten cosmonaut represents both the triumph and tragedy of human exploration, where individual lives become footnotes to larger historical narratives. Today, as private citizens prepare for their own journeys into space and commercial companies develop capabilities that exceed those available to early space programs, Ivan's story serves as both inspiration and warning. The universe beyond Earth remains largely unknown, filled with possibilities and dangers that we have barely begun to understand. The truth about Cosmonaut Zero may never be fully revealed, but his legacy lives on in the protocols and procedures that now govern human spaceflight. His methodical documentation of the unknown continues to inspire those who venture beyond the familiar boundaries of Earth, carrying with them the responsibility to observe, record, and report on whatever they may encounter in the vast darkness of space. And perhaps, somewhere in the cold emptiness between worlds, Ivan's spacecraft continues its eternal orbit, carrying with it the records of discoveries that could change humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. His final mission may have ended in silence, but the questions it raised continue to echo through the corridors of space exploration, waiting for answers that may yet come from the darkness he entered so many years ago. In 1968, 3 years after Ivan's disappearance, a routine maintenance operation at the Baikonur Cosmodrome uncovered evidence that would haunt those involved for the remainder of their lives. Workers renovating a storage facility discovered a sealed container marked only with Ivan's original designation number and the cryptic notation "Archive indefinitely." Inside, they found personal items that had been removed from his quarters after his departure. A photograph of his family, a worn copy of Tsiolkovsky's works on space exploration, and a letter addressed to his mother that he had apparently written but never sent. The letter, written in Ivan's precise handwriting, contained no reference to his actual mission or its classified nature. Instead, it spoke of his pride in serving the motherland and his confidence that his work would contribute to humanity's understanding of the cosmos. The final paragraph expressed his hope that future generations would build upon the foundations being laid by his generation of cosmonauts, regardless of whether their individual contributions were ever acknowledged publicly. This discovery prompted a quiet investigation by security personnel who had not been directly involved in Ivan's mission. Their inquiry revealed that several other cosmonauts from the same program had also disappeared from official records, though their fates remained even more mysterious than Ivan's. Some had reportedly been reassigned to other duties, while others had simply vanished without explanation during the height of the space program's secrecy. The investigating team discovered references to what appeared to be a systematic program of missions designed to explore phenomena that fell outside the normal parameters of space exploration. These operations were conducted under the direct authority of the highest levels of government, with operational security that exceeded even that of nuclear weapons programs. The few surviving documents suggested that Ivan's mission was part of a broader effort to investigate objects and activities in space that could not be explained by known natural phenomena or human technology. Dr. Mikhail Vladimirovich Petrov, a former flight controller who had participated in some of these classified missions, was located during the investigation. By 1968, he was working as a mathematics instructor at a technical institute in Leningrad, having left the space program under circumstances that were never fully explained. When approached by investigators, Dr. Petrov initially denied any knowledge of special missions or unusual objectives within the space program. However, after several interviews and assurances regarding the confidential nature of the inquiry, Dr. Petrov provided limited information about the communication anomalies that had affected Ivan's mission. He confirmed that contact with Ivan's spacecraft had been lost not due to equipment failure, but because of what he described as interference patterns that defied conventional explanation. The interference appeared to originate from the same regions of space where Ivan had been instructed to conduct his observations. According to Dr. Petrov's account, the decision to abandon communication attempts with Ivan's spacecraft came from authorities far above the level of normal mission control. The technical staff had proposed several options for re-establishing contact or mounting a rescue mission, but these suggestions were rejected without explanation. The official position became that the mission had never occurred, and all personnel involved were transferred to other assignments or removed from the program entirely. Dr. Petrov's testimony suggested that Ivan's fate had been sealed not by technical failure or human error, but by a deliberate decision to sacrifice him in order to protect information about the objects he had been sent to investigate. The authorities apparently concluded that the risk of revealing the existence of these phenomena outweighed the value of a single cosmonaut's life, regardless of his exceptional qualifications and service to the state. The investigation team also discovered that similar decisions had been made regarding other classified missions during the same period. A pattern emerged of cosmonauts being sent on high-risk assignments with limited support systems, often with objectives that seemed designed more to gather intelligence about unknown phenomena than to ensure the safe return of the crew members involved. These revelations raised disturbing questions about the ethical standards governing the Soviet space program and the extent to which human lives had been expendable in pursuit of strategic objectives. The investigation team found evidence suggesting that at least 12 cosmonauts had been lost in classified missions during the 1960s, with their deaths covered up through false documentation and the systematic destruction of records. The political climate of 1968 made it impossible to pursue these discoveries through official channels. The investigation was quietly terminated, and its findings were classified at levels that ensured they would remain secret for decades. The personnel involved in the inquiry were reassigned to positions where their knowledge of these matters would be less likely to surface, and additional security measures were implemented to prevent similar discoveries in the future. Dr. Petrov disappeared shortly after providing his testimony, reportedly suffering a heart attack while walking near his home in Leningrad. His body was never recovered, and the circumstances surrounding his death were never thoroughly investigated. His colleagues at the Technical Institute described his final weeks as a period of increasing anxiety and paranoia, during which he frequently spoke of being watched and followed by unknown individuals. The photograph found in Ivan's personal effects became the subject of particular interest to those who learned about the investigation. The image showed Ivan with his family during his final visit to Tula before joining the space program, taken in front of their building on Komsomolskaya Street. What drew attention was not the subjects of the photograph, but rather a detail visible in the background, a figure standing at a window in the building across the street, apparently watching the family as the picture was taken. Enhancement of the photograph revealed that the figure appeared to be holding some sort of optical device, possibly binoculars or a camera. The individual's face was not clearly visible, but their posture and positioning suggested they were conducting surveillance of the Volkov family. This discovery raised the possibility that Ivan had been under observation long before his selection for the space program, perhaps as early as his childhood in Tula. Further examination of records from Ivan's hometown revealed other anomalies that had not been apparent during his initial recruitment. Several of his childhood associates had later been recruited into sensitive government positions, suggesting a pattern of identification and cultivation that began much earlier than previously understood. His exceptional academic performance, while genuine, appeared to have been noticed and documented by authorities who maintained extensive files on promising young citizens throughout the Soviet Union. The implications of this discovery suggested that Ivan's selection for the classified mission was not the result of his performance during cosmonaut training, but rather the culmination of a decades-long process of evaluation and preparation. His psychological profile, which had seemed naturally suited to isolation and extreme stress, may have been shaped deliberately through experiences and influences that were arranged by his handlers without his knowledge. This revelation cast Ivan's entire life in a different light, raising questions about the extent to which his choices and experiences had been genuine versus the result of careful manipulation. The methodical precision that had characterized his behavior throughout his life might have been the product of conditioning rather than natural temperament, developed through a process that began in childhood and continued through his formal training. The letter Ivan had written to his mother, but never sent, contained subtle references that took on new meaning in light of these discoveries. His mention of purposes larger than individual understanding and service that transcends personal recognition suggested an awareness that his mission might involve sacrifices that went beyond normal military or scientific duty. The most disturbing aspect of these revelations was the realization that Ivan may have understood, at least partially, the true nature of his situation during his final weeks in space. His meticulous documentation of his circumstances and the mysterious objects he encountered might have been motivated not just by scientific curiosity, but by a desire to leave evidence that would eventually expose the truth about his fate and the program that had consumed his life. In 1972, a former Soviet intelligence officer named Alexei Konstantinovich Morozov defected to the West, bringing with him documents that provided additional context for Ivan's mission and the broader program of which it was a part. Morozov's revelations confirmed that the Soviet Union had been aware of unexplained objects in space since the late 1950s and had developed a systematic program to investigate these phenomena using expendable assets. According to Morozov's testimony, the objects observed by Ivan and other cosmonauts displayed technological capabilities that far exceeded anything available to either superpower during the Cold War. Their behavior suggested intelligence and purpose, but their origins and intentions remained completely unknown. The decision to investigate these objects using human observers was made because their advanced technology appeared to be capable of detecting and evading unmanned probes. The cosmonauts selected for these missions were chosen specifically for their psychological profiles and their lack of significant social connections that might lead to embarrassing questions if they disappeared. Ivan's isolated personality and his family's modest circumstances made him an ideal candidate for a mission that was expected to be one way from its conception. Morozov's documents also revealed that the communication problems experienced during Ivan's mission were not anomalies, but rather the expected result of interference generated by the objects under investigation. Previous missions had encountered similar phenomena, and the loss of contact was considered an acceptable risk in exchange for the intelligence that might be gathered about the object's capabilities and behavior. The Western intelligence agencies that debriefed Morozov were initially skeptical of his claims about extraterrestrial technology and secret space missions. However, their own monitoring of Soviet space activities had detected anomalies that were consistent with his descriptions, lending credibility to at least portions of his account. The implications of his revelations were considered so sensitive that they were classified at the highest levels and shared only with a very limited number of officials. Over the following decades, additional evidence supporting Morozov's claims surfaced through various channels. Retired military personnel reported radar contacts with objects displaying flight characteristics that exceeded the performance of any known aircraft or spacecraft. Pilots described encounters with unidentified objects that demonstrated awareness of their presence and seemed to be conducting their own observations of human activities. The consistency of these reports across different time periods and geographical locations suggested that the phenomena described by Ivan and the other lost cosmonauts were not isolated incidents, but rather part of an ongoing presence in Earth's vicinity that had been systematically covered up by both superpowers during the Cold War. In 1989, as the Soviet Union began its final collapse, additional documents related to Ivan's mission were discovered during the chaos of archive transfers and bureaucratic reorganization. These files contained technical specifications for the objects Ivan had observed, compiled from his sensor readings and photographic evidence. The specifications described technology that remained inexplicable even by the standards of late 20th century science. The objects appeared to be constructed from materials that exhibited properties not found in any known substances. Their propulsion systems generated no detectable exhaust or electromagnetic signatures, yet they were capable of accelerating at rates that would be lethal to any known form of life. Most disturbing of all, their behavior patterns suggested they were actively studying human space activities and had been doing so since the beginning of the space age. Ivan's final transmission, recovered from a backup recording system that had been forgotten in the archives, contained his last personal observations about his situation and the objects he had encountered. Speaking in a calm, measured tone that reflected his characteristic precision even in the face of death, he described his acceptance of his fate and his hope that his documentation would eventually contribute to humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. In this final message, Ivan revealed his awareness that his mission had been designed as a sacrifice from its beginning. He spoke of his pride in serving a purpose larger than individual survival, and expressed his belief that the knowledge he had gathered would eventually justify the cost of his life. His final words were a request that his observations be preserved and studied, regardless of the political circumstances that might prevent their immediate disclosure. The recording was authenticated through voice analysis and technical examination of the transmission equipment, confirming its origin from Ivan's spacecraft during his final days of life support. The calm acceptance evident in his voice suggested that his psychological conditioning had been successful in preparing him for his fate. Though whether this represented genuine peace or the result of systematic mental conditioning remained unclear. Today, more than 50 years after Ivan's disappearance, the questions raised by his mission remain largely unanswered. The objects he observed and documented have never been officially acknowledged by any government, though their existence has been confirmed through multiple independent sources over the decades. The technology they represent continues to exceed human capabilities, suggesting either extraterrestrial origins or human development programs that remain highly classified. The international space community has quietly implemented protocols designed to address encounters with unexplained phenomena, though these procedures are not publicly acknowledged. Astronauts and cosmonauts receive briefings on observation and documentation procedures for unusual objects or activities, and communication systems include secure channels for reporting sensitive information that might require special handling. Recent developments in commercial space exploration have increased the likelihood that private citizens may encounter the same phenomena that Ivan documented during his final mission. The implications of such discoveries reaching public attention without government mediation could be profound, potentially altering humanity's understanding of its technological development and its relationship with other intelligent life in the universe. Ivan's legacy extends beyond the tragedy of his individual fate to encompass the broader questions his mission raised about the responsibilities that come with knowledge and the costs that societies are willing to accept in pursuit of understanding. His methodical documentation of phenomena that challenged human comprehension established a standard for scientific observation that continues to influence protocols for space exploration today. The silence that surrounded his mission for decades serves as a reminder of how individual sacrifice can be obscured by institutional priorities and political considerations. His transformation from an exceptional student to a forgotten hero illustrates the complex relationship between personal achievement and historical recognition that continues to characterize human exploration of the unknown. As we venture deeper into space and develop technologies that approach those described in Ivan's observations, his experience provides both inspiration and caution. The universe beyond Earth clearly contains phenomena and possibly intelligences that we have barely begun to understand, and our approach to these discoveries will determine whether future explorers share his fate or benefit from the knowledge he died to obtain. The truth about Cosmonaut Zero may never be fully revealed, but his legacy lives on in the questions he raised and the documentation he preserved. Somewhere in the darkness between worlds, his spacecraft may still carry the evidence of discoveries that could transform humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos, waiting for the day when we are ready to confront the implications of what he found in the silence of space.